The icy winds howled across the barren plains of Rinus 7, carrying with them shards of frost that cut through even the thickest layers of protective gear. The colony, nestled within a jagged valley surrounded by towering glaciers, was barely holding on. Supplies were running low, and the once promising hope of survival had faded into grim determination. For months now, the colonists had fought against both the unforgiving environment and the relentless alien creatures that roamed the frozen wasteland. Every day brought new challenges, but none as dire as the one they faced today. Captain Yunho stood at the edge of the command center, his breath fogging up the reinforced glass window as he stared out at the bleak landscape. His face was lined with exhaustion, his dark eyes reflecting the dim glow of emergency lights flickering overhead. He clenched his fists tightly, trying to suppress the frustration bubbling inside him. They had sent out dozens of distress signals over the past weeks, each one met with silence. It felt like shouting into an endless void, their cries swallowed whole by the vast emptiness of space behind him. Yunjin approached cautiously. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her slender frame wrapped in a thick coat designed to ward off the biting cold. Her sharp gaze scanned the room before settling on Yunho. "Sir," she began softly, breaking the tense atmosphere, "we need to make another decision soon. If we don't act, we might not last another month." Yunho turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "What do you suggest?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. They had been over this countless times before. Their options were limited, and all of them came with risks. Yunjin hesitated for a moment before replying. "We could try sending another SOS signal. Maybe someone will hear us this time." Her voice wavered slightly, betraying her own doubts about the plan. Still, it was better than doing nothing. Unho sighed deeply, rubbing his temples as if trying to push away the weight pressing down on him. "And what happens if someone does respond?" he countered. "Not everyone out there is friendly. Some might see our plea as an invitation to take what little we have left. But staying silent guarantees our death," Yunjin insisted, stepping closer. Her tone grew firmer, more resolute. "At least reaching out gives us a chance, a small one, yes, but still a chance." For several long moments, Unho said nothing. He simply gazed at her, weighing the pros and cons of her proposal. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right," he muttered. "Prepare the transmission. But this time, let's include coordinates. If anyone is listening, maybe they'll understand how desperate we are." With renewed purpose, Yunjin hurried off to carry out his orders. Meanwhile, Yunho remained where he was, staring out at the horizon once again. Deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever response they received, if any, would change everything. And not necessarily for the better. Hours later, the colony gathered anxiously around the main communications console. Engineers worked frantically to boost the signal strength, ensuring it reached as far as possible. He Wu, the colony's resident tech expert, adjusted dials and switches with practiced precision. His hands moved quickly, almost instinctively, as sweat dripped from his brow despite the freezing temperatures. "Ready when you are, Captain," Hawu announced, glancing up briefly. His voice carried a mix of excitement and apprehension. Unho stepped forward, taking a deep breath to steady himself. With a nod, he gave the order. "Send it." A series of beeps echoed through the room as the message was transmitted into the cosmos. It was simple yet clear. To whoever receives this, we are humans stranded on Rinus 7. Our resources are depleted, and we face extinction without aid. Please, if you can help, contact us immediately. As the signal faded into the void, an eerie silence settled over the group. Everyone waited, holding their breaths, hoping against hope that someone or something would reply. Minutes stretched into hours, and just when despair threatened to creep back in, the console crackled to life. At first, It was garbled noise, static-filled and distorted. Then, faintly, words began to emerge. Received, coordinates noted. The voice sounded mechanical, devoid of emotion, yet undeniably intelligent. Gasps rippled through the crowd as realization dawned. They weren't alone after all. HFY scrambled to record the incoming message, his fingers flying across the keyboard. As fragments of information filtered through, one phrase stood out above the rest. Deathworlders, acknowledge your distress call. A vessel approaches. The room erupted into murmurs of relief and disbelief. Deathworlders? Who were they? Were they allies or enemies? No one knew for sure, but the mere fact that someone had responded filled the colonists with cautious optimism. Unho raised a hand to silence the chatter. Stay calm, he ordered, his voice firm but reassuring. We don't know who these Deathworlders are yet. Until we do, treat this as both an opportunity and a threat. Unbeknownst to the colonists, light years away, a sleek, ominous ship known as the Voidblade slid silently through the stars. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, absorbing and refracting light in unsettling ways. Inside, Kale sat motionless in the pilot's seat, his piercing gaze fixed on the data streaming across holographic displays. He had heard the SOS, analyzed its contents, and made his judgment. To the Deathworlders, such pleas were seen not as requests for assistance, but as declarations of weakness. According to their creed, only the strong deserve to thrive. Weakness invited annihilation. Kale's lips curled into a faint sneer as he initiated the ship's engines. Humanity's fate would soon be decided not by compassion, but by trial. The Voidblade accelerated toward Rinus 7, carrying with it neither aid nor mercy. Only judgment. Back on the icy planet, the colonists prepared for the arrival of their mysterious saviors or invaders. Captain Yunho rallied his people, urging them to remain vigilant. Yunjin coordinated defensive strategies, while Heiwu worked tirelessly to fortify their meager arsenal. Despite the uncertainty looming ahead, a spark of hope ignited within the hearts of the survivors. Little did they know, the true test of their resilience was only beginning. The days following the mysterious message dragged on, each one heavier than the last. The colonists on Rinus 7 tried to keep busy, repairing equipment, rationing supplies, and preparing for whatever or whoever was coming. But no amount of work could ease the tension that hung thick in the air. Every whisper of the wind outside sounded like footsteps. Every shadow cast by the flickering lights seemed to move on its own. Fear had taken root, twisting into something sharp and unyielding. Captain Unho paced back and forth in the command center, his boots crunching faintly against the icy floor. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Who were these Deathworlders? What did they want? Would they help or destroy everything the colony had worked so hard to build? He clenched his jaw, trying to focus on what he could control, rather than the endless stream of questions without answers. Yunjin stood nearby. Her arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if to ward off the chill seeping through the walls. She glanced at Yunho, then turned her attention to the monitors displaying data from their long-range scanners. Still nothing, she said quietly, her voice tinged with frustration. Whatever is coming, it's taking its time. Yunho stopped pacing and looked at her. Maybe that's a good thing, he replied, though he didn't sound convinced. It gives us more time to prepare. Or more time to worry, Yunjin muttered under her breath, but loud enough for him to hear before Yunho could respond. Heiwu burst into the room, his face flushed with excitement. Captain, he exclaimed, holding up a small device. I managed to boost the range of our sensors. We can get clearer readings now. Yunho straightened immediately, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Show me, he ordered, stepping closer to the console where Heiwu was already adjusting settings. A few moments later, An image appeared on the screen, a sleek, dark shape moving steadily toward Vrinus 7. It was unlike anything they had seen before. The ship's surface shimmered faintly, almost blending into the starry backdrop. Its design was alien, yet strangely beautiful, exuding an aura of power and menace. "That has to be them," Yoonjin whispered, her eyes wide with awe and unease. "The Deathworlders." As the ship drew nearer, panic began to ripple through the colony. People gathered in groups, whispering anxiously about what might happen next. Some clung to hope, believing the visitors would bring salvation. Others braced themselves for the worst, convinced that destruction loomed just beyond the horizon. When the Void Blade finally entered orbit above Vrinus 7, it did not announce itself with fanfare or communication. Instead, it simply hovered there, silent and ominous, casting a shadow over the settlement below. The sight sent shivers down everyone's spines. Captain Yunho wasted no time. "Everyone to their posts," he barked, his voice cutting through the rising murmur of fear. "Yoonjin, try to establish contact. Hey, Wu, keep monitoring that ship. If it moves, I want to know immediately." Yoonjin nodded and rushed to the communication station. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she attempted to hail the vessel. "This is Captain Eunho of the Vrinus 7 colony," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the knot of dread tightening in her stomach. "We received your response to our distress call. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." For several agonizing minutes, there was only silence. Then, abruptly, the speakers crackled to life. A deep, mechanical voice filled the room, sending chills down everyone's spines. "You are weak. You have called for judgment." Yoonjin froze, her hands hovering above the controls. Weak? Judgment? What did that mean? Before she could ask, the transmission continued. "Prepare yourselves. Your worthiness will be tested." The line went dead. Yuanho exchanged a glance with Yoonjin, both of them pale with shock. "What does that even mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means we're not dealing with rescuers," Eunho replied grimly. "Get everyone ready. Whatever happens next, it won't be friendly." Hours passed in tense anticipation. The ship remained stationary, its presence looming like a storm cloud refusing to break. Just when some began to wonder if the Deathworlders had abandoned them, the first wave of biomechanical drones descended. They emerged from the belly of the Void Blade. Sleek and insect-like, their metallic bodies glinting ominously in the dim light. As they approached the colony, their movements were eerily synchronized, as if guided by a single hive mind. Each drone bore striking similarities to the native predators of Vrinus 7, blending seamlessly into the environment while amplifying their lethality with advanced technology. Chaos erupted almost instantly. The drones attacked without warning, targeting structures, vehicles, and people indiscriminately. Their weapons emitted high-pitched whines before unleashing bursts of energy that tore through walls and flesh alike. Colonists scrambled for cover, shouting orders and firing makeshift rifles that did little to slow the assault. In the midst of the chaos, Captain Yunho barked commands, trying to rally his people. "Fall back to the bunkers. Protect the wounded." Smoke and frost mingled in the air, making it hard to see or breathe. Despite the odds, the colonists fought back with everything they had, driven by sheer desperation. Inside the Void Blade, Kale observed the scene with detached interest. His expression remained stoic as holographic displays projected real-time footage of the battle below. Humans scurried like ants, fighting valiantly despite being outmatched. He leaned forward slightly, studying their tactics. They adapted quickly, using the terrain to their advantage and coordinating attacks in small teams. For a brief moment, Kale felt a flicker of admiration. These humans were fragile, yes, but also resourceful. Still, Admiration meant nothing in the eyes of the Deathworlders. Strength was the only measure of worth, and weakness invited eradication. Kale activated a secondary protocol, deploying additional waves of drones. This time, they carried payloads designed to mimic the behavior of local wildlife venomous creatures, capable of paralyzing their prey. The combination of mechanized efficiency and biological savagery made the new threat even deadlier. Back on the ground, the colonists struggled to hold their ground. Pei Wu crouched behind a pile of rubble, tinkering with a damaged rifle. Sweat dripped from his brow as he worked frantically to repair it. Nearby, Subin knelt beside an injured man, her hands trembling as she applied pressure to a bleeding wound. Her lips moved in silent prayer, though whether it was for herself or the dying man, she couldn't say. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed through the battlefield. One of the biomechanical drones had transformed mid-flight, its body morphing into a monstrous hybrid of machine and beast. Razor-sharp claws tore through the air as it lunged toward a group of defenders. Screams erupted as the creature struck, scattering survivors in all directions. Yunjin spotted the carnage from her position near the command center. Without hesitation, she grabbed a flare gun and fired a bright red signal into the sky. "Retreat. Fall back to the bunker," she shouted, her voice cutting through the din. Colonists obeyed, retreating in waves as the drones pressed their advantage. Inside the bunker, Captain Unho slammed his fist against the wall in frustration. "We can't keep this up," he growled. "If we don't find a way to stop those things, we're done for." Pei Wu raised his hand hesitantly. "There might be a way," he said, his voice shaky but determined. "The drones, they're controlled remotely. If we can jam their signals, we might be able to disable them temporarily." Yunho stared at him, weighing the idea. "Do it," he ordered. "Whatever it takes." As the survivors were grouped and prepared for another stand, Kale watched silently from his perch among the stars. He had seen countless species fall under similar trials, their pleas for mercy ignored by the cold logic of the Deathworlders. Yet something about these humans intrigued him. Perhaps it was their refusal to give up, even when faced with overwhelming odds. Or perhaps it was the way they fought not just for themselves, but for each other. Whatever it was, Kale couldn't deny the stirrings of doubt creeping into his mind. For the first time in his life, he questioned the righteousness of his mission. But questioning was dangerous. On the battlefield, hesitation equaled death, and Kale knew better than most that death came swiftly for those who faltered. Night fell over Rinus 7, blanketing the colony in darkness. Fires smoldered in the distance, casting eerie orange glows across the frozen landscape. The colonists huddled together in the bunker, nursing wounds and planning their next move. Outside, the drones lay dormant, waiting for further instructions. Far above, Kale sat alone in the cockpit of the Void Blade. His gaze drifted to the planet below, where tiny figures moved like shadows against the ice. For now, the test continued. But for how much longer? And at what cost? The bunker was quiet, save for the soft hum of generators and the occasional groan of someone nursing an injury. The air inside felt heavy, thick with exhaustion and fear. The colonists sat in clusters, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes hollow from lack of sleep. Yet despite the weariness that clung to them like a second skin, there was a spark of determination burning within. They had survived the first wave of attacks, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the drones returned. And when they did, the colony would need more than makeshift weapons and sheer willpower to hold its ground. Captain Yunho stood at the center of the room, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His gaze swept across the group, taking in their weary expressions and tense postures. He could feel the weight of their hopes and fears resting squarely on his shoulders. For a moment, he allowed himself to close his eyes, drawing in a slow, steadying breath. When he opened them again, his voice cut through the silence like a blade. "We can't fight them the way we are," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "If we want to survive, we need to adapt. We need to fight smarter, not harder." Yoon-jin nodded in agreement, stepping forward to stand beside him. "Hey, Wu has an idea," she added, gesturing toward the young engineer who was already fiddling with a tangle of wires and circuit boards. "It might give us a chance." All eyes turned to Hae-woo, who looked up from his work with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Remember what I said earlier? About jamming the signals?" He began, his voice shaky but growing stronger as he continued. "I think I can modify some of our old mining equipment to disrupt the drone's control systems. If we can cut off their connection to the Void Blade, we might be able to disable them at least long enough to regroup." Yoon-ho studied him carefully, weighing the risks and rewards of the plan. It was risky, yes, but they were out of options. "Do it," he said finally, his voice firm. "Whatever you need, take it. Just make sure it works." With renewed purpose, Hae-woo dove into his task, surrounded by a small team of volunteers who helped gather parts and tools. The bunker buzzed with activity as people worked tirelessly, their movements quick and deliberate. Even those too injured to assist pitched in where they could, offering advice or simply keeping spirits high with words of encouragement. Meanwhile, Captain Yoon-ho turned his attention to the bigger picture. "Yoon-jin," he called, motioning for her to join him near the makeshift map spread out on a table. "We need to figure out where to set up these jammers. Spread them too thin, and they won't do any good. Concentrate them in one spot, and we risk losing them all if the drones target that area." Yoon-jin leaned over the map, her sharp eyes scanning the layout of the settlement. "What about here?" she suggested, pointing to a cluster of abandoned buildings near the edge of the colony. "It's far enough from the bunker to keep us safe, but close enough to cover most of the area. Plus, the structures will provide some cover while we set up." Yoon-ho nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. Let's get moving as soon as Hae-woo is ready." As the hours ticked by, tension mounted. Outside, the icy winds howled relentlessly, carrying with them the promise of another attack. Inside, the colonists worked against the clock, their hands moving quickly but carefully. Every mistake, every delay, brought them closer to disaster. Finally, just as dawn began to break over the horizon, Hae-woo stepped back from his workbench with a triumphant grin. "It's done," he announced, holding up a crude device cobbled together from scraps of metal and wiring. "This should do the trick." Yoon-ho wasted no time. "All right, everyone grab your gear. We move now." The journey to the designated location was fraught with danger. The colonists moved in small groups, sticking to the shadows cast by the jagged glaciers and ruined buildings. Their breaths came in short, visible puffs, mingling with the frost-laden air. Every sound, the crunch of boots on ice, the distant howl of the wind set their nerves on edge. When they reached the abandoned buildings, Hae-woo and his team got to work setting up the jammers. Each device was placed strategically, forming a loose perimeter around the area. As they worked, Captain Yoon-ho kept watch, his rifle at the ready. Yoon-jin stayed close by, her eyes scanning the skies for any sign of movement. Suddenly, a faint buzzing noise filled the air. Everyone froze, their hearts pounding in unison. Overhead, the sleek shapes of biomechanical drones appeared, gliding silently toward the colony. They moved with eerie precision, their metallic bodies gleaming in the weak morning light. "Get down!" Yoon-ho hissed, dropping to a crouch behind a pile of debris. The others followed suit, pressing themselves flat against the icy ground as the drones passed overhead. For a moment, it seemed like they might go unnoticed. Then, without warning, one of the drones paused mid-flight, its sensors locking onto the hidden group below. With a deafening screech, it unleashed a burst of energy, sending shards of ice and rock flying in all directions. Pandemonium erupted as the colonists scrambled for cover. Awu shouted orders, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "Activate the jammers, now." One by one, the devices sprang to life, emitting low-frequency pulses designed to interfere with the drone's control systems. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly but surely, the drones began to falter. Their movements became erratic, jerky, as if struggling against an invisible force. Some plummeted to the ground, their bodies sparking and sputtering as they collided with the ice. A cheer went up from the colonists, their voices hoarse but filled with triumph. For the first time since the arrival of the Voidblade, they had gained the upper hand, but the victory was short-lived. High above, Kale watched the scene unfold with a mixture of curiosity and frustration. His fingers hovered over the controls, ready to deploy reinforcements. Yet something held him back. These humans, they were proving to be more resilient than he had anticipated. More resourceful, more human. He leaned back in his seat, his brow furrowed in thought. The Deathworlders' doctrine was clear. Strength equaled worthiness. Weakness invited annihilation. But what about ingenuity? What about adaptability? Were those not forms of strength as well? Kale shook his head, dispelling the thoughts before they could take root. Doubt was dangerous. On the battlefield, hesitation equaled death. Still, he couldn't deny the flicker of admiration stirring deep within him. Perhaps this test was not yet over. Back on the ground, the colonists regrouped, their spirits buoyed by their unexpected success. Captain Yunho surveyed the scene with a mixture of pride and caution. "Good work," he said, addressing the group. "But don't let your guard down. This isn't over." Subin knelt beside one of the fallen drones, examining its twisted form with a mix of fascination and revulsion. She reached out tentatively, brushing her fingers against its cold, metallic surface. "They're amazing," she murmured, half to herself. "And terrifying." Yoonjin joined her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Focus on staying alive," she said gently. "We'll worry about understanding them later." As the colonists prepared for the next phase of the battle, Kale observed silently from afar. He had seen countless species fall under similar trials, their pleas for mercy ignored by the cold logic of the Deathworlders. Yet these humans, fragile, flawed, yet fiercely determined, were beginning to challenge everything he thought he knew. Perhaps, he mused, strength was not always measured in brute force. Perhaps resilience, creativity, and unity were equally valid markers of worthiness. The thought unsettled him, planting seeds of doubt that refused to be ignored. The victory over the drones was bittersweet. Though the colonists had managed to disable a significant number of them, the cost had been high. Several people were injured, and 2 lives had been lost in the chaos. The air inside the bunker felt heavier than ever, weighed down by grief and exhaustion. Yet amidst the sorrow, there was also a flicker of hope, a fragile belief that they could endure, that they might yet find a way to survive. Captain Unho sat at the edge of the main chamber, staring at the floor as if searching for answers etched into the icy surface. His hands rested on his knees, calloused fingers tapping rhythmically against his thighs. He knew the lull wouldn't last long. Sooner or later, the Voidblade would send more drones or worse. They needed a plan, something bigger than jamming signals or repurposing old equipment. Something bold enough to tip the scales in their favor. Yoonjin approached him cautiously, her boots crunching softly against the frost-covered ground. She knelt beside him, her voice low but steady. "We can't keep this up forever," she said, echoing his own thoughts. "Even if we manage to disable another wave of drones, what then? It's only a matter of time before they overwhelm us." Inho nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "I know," he admitted. But giving up isn't an option either. There has to be a way to end this, not just delay it. Wu joined them moments later, his face flushed with excitement despite the grim circumstances. What if we go after the source? He suggested, his words tumbling out in a rush. If we take out the Void Blade, we cut off their control completely. No more drones, no more attacks. Yunho raised an eyebrow, skepticism written across his face. And how do you propose we do that? We're barely holding on down here. Attacking a ship like that is suicide. Not necessarily, Wu countered, undeterred. We don't need to destroy it entirely. Just breach its defenses long enough to disable whatever system controls the drones. If we can get inside, even for a few minutes, we might be able to shut it all down. The idea was risky, reckless, even, but it wasn't without merit. Yunho exchanged a glance with Yunjin, who looked equally torn. Finally, he sighed deeply. All right, he said, his tone resolute. Let's hear your plan. Over the next several hours, the colonists worked feverishly to prepare for the assault. Using scraps salvaged from the disabled drones, Wu and his team constructed crude explosives designed to penetrate the Void Blade's outer hull. Others modified rifles and armor, reinforcing them with whatever materials they could scavenge. Every available hand contributed, driven by a shared determination to reclaim their future. Su Bin played a key role in the preparations, tending to the wounded while offering words of encouragement to those around her. Her presence seemed to calm the frayed nerves of the group, providing a sense of stability amidst the chaos. Even Captain Yunho found himself leaning on her quiet strength during moments of doubt. As night fell once again, the team assembled near the edge of the colony, hidden beneath the shadow of a massive glacier. Their makeshift shuttle, a battered transport vehicle retrofitted with reinforced plating, stood ready to carry them into the unknown. The journey ahead was perilous, fraught with danger at every turn. But standing still meant certain death. Before boarding, Yunho addressed the group one final time. This won't be easy, he began, his voice firm but tinged with emotion. Some of us may not make it back. But if we succeed, we'll have a chance, not just to survive, but to fight another day. Remember why we're doing this. For each other. For humanity. With that, they climbed aboard the shuttle, their hearts pounding with anticipation. As the engines roared to life, the craft lifted off the ground, ascending toward the dark silhouette of the Void Blade looming above inside the alien vessel. Kale monitored the approaching shuttle with detached interest. His sensors detected the humans' crude modifications, their desperate attempts to pierce his ship's defenses. Part of him admired their audacity. Another part wondered if such bravery warranted mercy. Mercy, however, was not something the Deathworlders granted lightly. Still, Kale hesitated. Over the past days, he had observed the colonists closely, their resilience, their unity, their refusal to surrender despite overwhelming odds. Slowly but surely, cracks had begun to form in his rigid beliefs. Perhaps strength wasn't solely defined by dominance. Perhaps compassion had its place, even among the stars. As the shuttle drew closer, Kale made a decision. He would allow them entry, not because he sympathized with their plight, but because he wanted to see how far they would go. Would they crumble under pressure, or would they rise to meet the challenge? The shuttle docked with a metallic clang, its occupants spilling out into the dimly lit corridors of the Void Blade. The interior was eerily silent, the walls shimmering faintly as if alive. Yunho led the group forward, his rifle raised and his senses on high alert. Behind him, Yunjin and Heiwo carried the explosives, their movements cautious but deliberate. Su Bin brought up the rear, her medical kit slung over her shoulder. They moved quickly, following the map Heiwu had pieced together from sensor data. The ship's layout was labyrinthine, its passages twisting and turning unpredictably. At every corner, they expected resistance. but none came. The eerie silence gnawed at their nerves, making each step feel heavier than the last. Finally, they reached their destination, the central control room. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a vast chamber filled with glowing holographic displays and pulsating machinery. In the center stood Kale, his imposing figure illuminated by the cold light of the consoles. For a moment, no one moved. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Then, Yunho stepped forward, his weapon trained squarely on the alien warrior. "Stand down," he ordered, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his insides. "We're ending this now." Kale regarded him calmly, his expression unreadable. "You are brave," he said finally, his mechanical voice devoid of emotion. "Braver than most I have encountered. But bravery alone does not guarantee survival." Before Yunho could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. Reinforcements were inbound, more drones, stronger and faster than before. Panic rippled through the group, but Yunho held his ground. "We didn't come here to die," he growled. "We came to fight." To everyone's surprise, Kale lowered his weapon. "Then fight," he replied simply. "But know this, your enemy is not me. It is the creed I serve." With that, he turned and activated a secondary console, disabling portions of the ship's automated defenses. The path to the control systems was clear, but so was the danger. As the first wave of drones descended upon them, the colonists sprang into action, fighting with everything they had left. Ho planted the explosives with trembling hands, setting timers that ticked down mercilessly. Yunjin covered him, firing bursts of energy at the encroaching machines. Yunho led the charge, his leadership unwavering even as the odds stacked against them. And Subin stayed close, patching wounds and urging everyone to hold on just a little longer. Through it all, Kale watched silently, his internal conflict reaching a breaking point. These humans, they were proving themselves worthy not through brute force, but through unity and resolve. Wasn't that a form of strength, too? When the last explosive detonated, crippling the ship's drone control systems, the colonists retreated hastily, dragging their injured comrades behind them. As they boarded the shuttle and prepared for departure, Kale remained where he stood, his fate uncertain. Back on Vrinus 7, the survivors gathered in stunned silence, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. For the first time in days, the skies above were clear. No drones lingered, no ominous shadows loomed overhead. Against all odds, they had won. But as Captain Yunho gazed upward, his thoughts drifted to Kale. What had become of the enigmatic pilot? Had he perished alongside his ship, or had he chosen a different path? Whatever the answer, one thing was certain. Humanity's struggle was far from over. The shuttle descended slowly toward the icy surface of Vrinus 7, its engines groaning under the strain of re-entry. Inside, the colonists sat in silence, their faces pale and drawn from exhaustion. The battle aboard, the Voidblade had pushed them to their limits, leaving both physical and emotional scars that would take time to heal. Yet despite the weariness clinging to them like a second skin, there was an undeniable sense of triumph in the air. They had done the impossible. They had fought back against forces far greater than themselves and emerged victorious. Captain Yunho stood at the front of the shuttle, his hands gripping the edge of the viewport as he stared out at the frozen landscape below. His mind replayed the events of the past hours over and over again. The chaos, the sacrifices, the moments of courage that had turned the tide in their favor. But one figure lingered in his thoughts more than any other. Kale, the alien warrior's decision to stand aside, to disable parts of the ship's defenses rather than fight alongside the drones, had been unexpected, a gesture that hinted at something deeper beneath his cold exterior. As the shuttle touched down near the colony's makeshift landing pad, Yunho turned to address the group. "We made it," he said simply, though his voice carried a weight of gratitude and relief. "But we wouldn't be here without every single one of you. Remember that." The survivors disembarked cautiously, their boots crunching softly against the frost-covered ground. The settlement lay battered but intact, its structures scarred by the earlier battles yet still standing. Fires smoldered in the distance, casting flickering shadows across the ice. It was a stark reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. Su Bin moved among the injured, her hands steady as she tended to wounds and offered words of comfort. Her presence brought a sense of calm to those around her, a quiet reassurance that they were safe for now. Yunjin stayed close to Yunho, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Though the immediate threat had passed, none of them could shake the feeling that danger might return at any moment. Wu meanwhile inspected the damage to the settlement with a mixture of frustration and pride. "We'll need to rebuild," he muttered, running his fingers along a cracked wall. "But at least we've got time now. Time to rest, regroup, and start fresh." Yunho nodded absently, his gaze drifting upward once again. High above, the void blade hung motionless in orbit, its sleek form shimmering faintly in the weak sunlight. What had happened to Kale after they left? Had he survived the destruction of the control systems, or had he chosen to remain aboard the doomed vessel? The questions gnawed at him, refusing to let go. Inside the void blade, Kale sat alone in the dimly lit cockpit, his expression unreadable. Around him, the ship's systems flickered erratically, damaged beyond repair by the colonists' explosives. He knew it was only a matter of time before the vessel succumbed entirely, drifting aimlessly through space until it burned up in some distant star's atmosphere. Yet he felt no fear, only a strange sense of peace. For years, Kale had served the Deathworlders without question, adhering to their creed that strength equaled worthiness. Weakness, in their eyes, invited annihilation. But the humans of Rinus 7 had challenged that belief, forcing him to confront the flaws in his own logic. Their resilience, ingenuity, and unity had proven that strength came in many forms, not just brute force, but also compassion, adaptability, and hope. Kale leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes as memories of the battle played through his mind. He saw Captain Yunho leading his people with unwavering determination. He saw Su Bin risking her life to save others, even when all seemed lost. And he saw himself, hesitating for the first time in his life, choosing not to follow orders blindly, but to act according to what he believed was right. When he opened his eyes again, his decision was clear. Reaching forward, he activated the ship's communication system one final time. A faint crackle filled the air as he transmitted a message, not to the Deathworlders, but to the colony below. "This is Kale of the Void Blade. Your actions have changed my understanding of strength. You are worthy of survival. I will not report your existence to my people. Live well, humans." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving behind only static. Moments later, the ship's engines sputtered and died, plunging the cockpit into darkness. Back on Rinus 7. The message echoed through the settlement's communications console, startling everyone who heard it. Captain Yunho listened intently, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "They spared us," he murmured, shaking his head in amazement. "After everything, he chose to let us live." Yunjin placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe he saw something in us," she suggested softly. "Something worth saving." The news spread quickly among the colonists, sparking a mix of emotions, relief, gratitude, and even sadness. Though Kale had been their enemy, his act of defiance had given them a second chance. For many, it was a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the universe, kindness and understanding could still exist. As night fell over the colony, the survivors gathered around a large bonfire, its flames licking hungrily at the icy air. They shared stories of the battle, honoring those who had fallen and celebrating the bonds that had kept them together. Laughter mingled with tears, creating a tapestry of shared humanity that warmed them from within. Subin sat apart from the group, gazing up at the stars scattered across the blackened sky. Her thoughts drifted to Kale, wondering if he had found peace among the endless void. She whispered a silent thank you, hoping he could hear it wherever he was. Eun-Ho joined her moments later, sitting beside her in companionable silence. Together, they watched as the first hints of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the glaciers in shades of gold and pink. It was a new day, a fresh start. "We did it," Eun-Ho said finally, his voice soft but filled with conviction. "Not just surviving, but proving that we deserve to. No matter what comes next, we'll face it together." Subin nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Together," she echoed. Far above, the remnants of the Void Blade drifted silently into the depths of space, carrying with it the legacy of a warrior who had chosen redemption over duty. Humanity's fate on Vrinus 7 was uncertain, fraught with challenges yet to come. But for now, they had earned their place among the stars.